I hit record before I even knew what I was doing. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the screaming, not the locked door, not my uncle standing in the hallway afterward with his hands in his pockets like he was waiting for a bus. The part that stays with me is the moment my thumb pressed that little red button on my phone. Automatic, almost unconscious. Like some part of me already knew that no one was going to believe me without proof. I was 26. It was Thanksgiving, and my family has never been the same since. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without context, and I've learned the hard way that when you drop a story like this into a room without context, people fill in the blanks with whatever makes them most comfortable. And comfortable usually means finding a way to make it your fault. My name is Lyra. I'm the middle child, which means I spent most of my childhood being ignored in the specific way that only middle children understand. Not neglected exactly, just consistently overlooked. My older brother Cormac got the responsibility. My younger sister Petra got the softness. I got the space between them, which sounds lonely. And it was. But it also meant I learned to watch people very carefully. I noticed things. That's important. My uncle, my mother's younger brother, had always been the favorite in our family. His name was Stellan. He was charming in the way that men who've never been told no tend to be charming. Loud at the right moments, quiet when it suited him. Generous with money, and stingy with accountability. He coached youth soccer for 12 years. He organized the neighborhood 4th of July party every summer. He gave the best toasts at weddings. Everyone loved Stellan. I had never loved Stellan. I couldn't tell you exactly when the feeling started. Somewhere around 13, maybe. The way he looked at me sometimes. The way his hugs lasted a half second too long. The way he laughed when I pulled away and said, "You're so serious, Lyra, lighten up." I had no proof of anything. I had a feeling, and feelings, especially the feelings of teenage girls, don't get much airtime in my family. So I grew up, I moved away, I built a life 3 states away in Portland, and I told myself that whatever that feeling was, it lived back in Ohio with everyone else I'd left behind. Then my cousin Waverly turned 15, and something shifted in me that I can't fully explain. Waverly was Stellan's stepdaughter. He'd married her mother, my Aunt Drusilla, when Waverly was 6. Drusilla was soft-spoken, deeply Catholic, and had a way of smoothing over discomfort with casseroles and subject changes. Waverly had grown up in that house with Stellan as her stepfather, and the last 2 Christmases, something about her had felt off. Quieter than usual, eyes that didn't quite land anywhere. She'd always been the kid who talked too fast and laughed too loud. Suddenly she wasn't. I noticed. I mentioned it to my mother once, carefully. The way you test ice before you step on it. She said, "She's just a teenager. You remember what that was like." I said I did. I let it go. That was my mistake, and I have to live with it. Not the kind of living with it that people mean when they say forgive yourself. I mean the actual weight of it. I knew something was wrong and I talked myself out of it because I didn't want to be the person who caused a scene at Christmas over a feeling. I've thought about that a lot. The Thanksgiving I'm talking about, Waverly was 15 and a half. I drove in from Portland 18 hours, I don't fly, and arrived Wednesday night at my parents' house, which is the house I grew up in, which still smells like the same fabric softener my mother has used since 1994. My brother Cormac was there with his wife. My sister Petra was there with her boyfriend. Stellan and Drusilla were staying in the guest room because they lived 40 minutes away and someone had decided it was easier this way. Waverly was sleeping in my old room. I took the pull-out couch in the basement and didn't complain about it. Wednesday night was fine. Dinner was fine. Stellan was loud and funny and everyone laughed at his stories. And I sat at the end of the table and watched him the way I'd always watched him and felt the same thing I'd always felt and told myself again that it was nothing. Waverly went to bed early. I noticed that too. Thursday morning was chaos in the good way. My mother's turkey, football on TV, Cormac and his wife arguing gently about whether to brine next year. I was helping in the kitchen around 10 when I realized I hadn't seen Waverly come down. I went upstairs to check on her. The hallway was quiet. The door to my old room was closed. I raised my hand to knock. That's when I heard it, not a scream exactly, more like a sound that shouldn't exist. A sound with no good explanation, the kind of sound that lives in your stomach for the rest of your life. My hand stopped in the air. And then I heard her voice, low and strained, saying, "Stop. Please stop." I don't remember deciding to open the door. I don't remember my hand on the knob. I remember the door being closed, and then I remember it being open, and in between, there was just a gap where thought used to be. And then I remember pressing record. I'm not going to describe what I saw in detail. I'm not going to do that to Waverly, and I'm not going to do that to myself. What I will tell you is that what I saw was unambiguous. There was no other interpretation. And Stellan, when he saw me standing in the doorway, didn't run, didn't panic, didn't even look afraid. He looked annoyed, like I had interrupted something. I heard myself say, very quietly, "Get out of this room." He said, "Lyra, you need to calm down. This isn't what it looks like." I said, "Get out of this room." He left. He walked past me into the hallway, and I heard him go down the stairs, and I did not look at him because I was looking at Waverly, who was sitting on the edge of the bed with her arms wrapped around herself, not making any sound at all. I sat down next to her. I didn't touch her. I didn't know if she wanted to be touched. I just sat there until she looked at me. She said, "Please don't tell my mom." I said, "Waverly." She said, "She won't believe you. She never believes anything bad about him. Please, please don't." I had 30 seconds maybe before I had to decide what kind of person I was going to be, before I had to choose between the peace of this family, a peace that had never actually been peace, just silence, dressed up in good casseroles and polished table manners, and this 15-year-old sitting next to me who had just said, "Please stop," behind a door. I called 911. The next 45 minutes are both the clearest and most fragmented memory of my life. I remember the dispatcher's voice, steady and calm, and I remember how much I needed that. I remember going downstairs and standing in the living room where everyone was gathered and saying, "I called the police. They're on their way." I remember my mother's face. I remember Cormac saying, "What?" I remember Stellan standing by the fireplace, and I remember that he still did not look afraid. Drusilla looked at me and said, "What did you do?" Not a question. A verdict. Stellan said, "This is a misunderstanding. Lyra has always had a vivid imagination." My mother said nothing. She looked at the floor. My mother, who I have called every Sunday my entire adult life, who came to Portland twice a year and stayed in my apartment and drank my coffee and told me she was proud of me. She looked at the floor. That was the moment that broke something in me that hasn't fully healed. The police came, 2 officers. I showed them the video. I watched one of them watch it, and I watched his expression change, and that expression, controlled, professional, but unmistakably changed, told me everything I needed to know about whether I had imagined it. They took Stellan outside. Drusilla started crying. Not for Waverly. I want to be very clear about that. She was crying and saying, he would never do this. Lyra has always had a problem with him. Everyone knows this. She's always been jealous. Petra grabbed my hand under the dining table and held it. That's the thing I remember most about Petra in that moment. She didn't say a word. She just held my hand. The weeks after that there's no clean word for it. Stellan was arrested. The video was preserved as evidence. The detectives told me, as gently as law enforcement tells you anything, that there would be an investigation, that these things take time, that I had done the right thing. Waverly was interviewed by a specialist, a woman with a calm voice and a small office with soft chairs. I don't know what Waverly told her. I wasn't there. But I know that afterward, the case moved forward. What I did not expect was what happened with my family. Drusilla stopped speaking to me immediately and permanently. That I understood in a terrible way. Her whole life was built around a version of Stellan that couldn't survive what I'd seen. I understood it the way you understand a building collapsing. You can comprehend the physics without finding it any less devastating. My mother was harder to understand. She called me 3 days after Thanksgiving while Stellan was out on bail, and she said, "I just want you to know that whatever happens, this has been very hard on all of us. On all of us." I sat with the phone against my ear and I thought about Waverly saying, "Please stop behind a closed door," and I said, "Mom, he was hurting her." She said, "We don't know all the facts yet." I said, I was there. She said, I know. I know you were. But Lyra, these things are complicated and the family, I hung up. We didn't speak for 4 months. I want to be honest about what that cost me because I think people sometimes imagine that righteous moments are clean. That when you do the right thing, you feel righteous. That the hard part comes before, not after. But the hard part for me came in the weeks following, when I was back in Portland, alone in my apartment, eating cereal for dinner, and staring at my phone waiting for someone in my family to say, clearly and without qualifications, you did the right thing. Petra said it. She texted me from her car outside our parents' house because she didn't want anyone to see. She said, you saved her. I want you to know that I know that. Cormac didn't say anything for 2 weeks, and then he sent me a long email that I've read maybe 40 times. That starts with, I'm struggling with all of this, and ends with, I believe you. The middle is messy and honest, and I understand why it took him 2 weeks. My parents said nothing useful for a very long time. The trial was 8 months later. I flew to Ohio for it, which meant I got on a plane for the first time in 6 years, which I mention, not for sympathy, but because I want you to understand that I did not want to be there. I wanted to be in Portland, in my apartment, in my life. I wanted to have never had a reason to be in a courthouse in Columbus in March, sitting in a wooden chair with my hands in my lap, waiting. Stellan's lawyer was good. I want to be fair about that, in the way I try to be fair about things that make me furious. He was good, and he tried everything. The video's angle, the timing, the suggestion that I had a history of conflict with Stellan, the implication that Waverly was troubled and given to attention-seeking. Waverly testified. I was not allowed to be in the room for that, and I sat outside in a hallway on a plastic chair for 1 hour and 47 minutes. I know the exact time because I watched the clock the entire time. When the doors opened and I saw Waverly's face, pale, exhausted, but upright, I got up and she walked toward me and I put my arms around her and she let me. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. Stellan was convicted on 3 counts. He was sentenced to 22 years. The courtroom was quiet when the judge read it. Not the stunned quiet of surprise, more like the exhale of something that had been held too long. Drusilla walked out without looking at anyone. My mother, sitting 2 rows behind me, made a sound I had never heard from her before, low and almost animal. And I turned around and looked at her and she looked back at me and she mouthed something I couldn't quite read, but looked like I'm sorry. I'm still deciding what to do with that. Here's the thing about justice that no one tells you. It's real and it matters, and it does something in your chest when a judge says guilty and reads out a number that means this man will not be free until he's in his mid-50s. Something releases. I won't pretend it doesn't, but it doesn't put things back the way they were. It doesn't reach backward and change the sound behind the door. It doesn't give Waverly her 15th year. It doesn't undo the 4 months of silence from my mother or explain why my uncle coached youth soccer for 12 years, or answer the question that keeps me up at night, which is, how many times did I have a feeling and talk myself out of it, and what did that cost? Drusilla was never charged with anything. She knew. I know she knew because of things that came out in the trial. Texts, a conversation a neighbor overheard 2 years earlier, Waverly's own testimony about things she had said to her mother that were met with nothing. Drusilla knew, and she said nothing, and she is currently living in her sister's house in Cincinnati, and as far as I know, she still talks about Stellan in the past tense like he's dead rather than incarcerated, and she has not once, called to check on her daughter. That is the part that I don't know how to forgive. I've thought about it a lot. I've talked to a therapist about it, a good one who I started seeing 6 weeks after Thanksgiving and have not stopped seeing, and she told me once that forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation, that I can work toward releasing the weight of it without having to extend any grace to the person who caused it, and I'm trying to believe that. I'm a work in progress. Waverly is living with her maternal grandmother now in a house that I've been told is quiet and steady and full of books, which feels right to me. She turns 17 next month. I'm going to send her something. I'm not sure what yet. Something that says, I see you, without making her feel like a cause. She texted me once about 3 months after the trial. It said, I still have the rabbit stuffed animal you gave me when I was little. I sleep with it. I cried for probably 20 minutes and then I called Petra and cried for 20 more. My parents and I are careful with each other now. That's the most honest word I have. My mother has never directly said she was wrong, but she drove up to Portland in January and sat at my kitchen table and drank my coffee and stayed for 4 days, and on the last morning she held my face in her hands the way she used to when I was very small and said, "I should have listened to you better about a lot of things." That's probably as close as I'm going to get. I'm trying to decide if it's enough. My father, who has said very little about any of this from the beginning, stopped me as I was carrying her bag to the car and said, in his particular way of speaking that has never once used more words than necessary, "You're a good person, Lyra. Don't let any of this tell you otherwise." I sat in the car for a long time after they drove away. I've thought about why I'm telling this story. I've thought about it a lot, actually, because there's a version of me that wants to keep all of this private, tucked behind a door of my own, processed in that small office with the soft chairs, and then filed somewhere that only I can access. But then I think about who I was at 13, feeling something I couldn't name and having no one to name it with. I think about the half-second too long hugs and telling myself I was being dramatic. I think about the last 2 Christmases and Waverly's eyes not landing anywhere, and me walking away from that feeling because I didn't want to be the person who caused a scene. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's not a lesson. I hate when stories like mine get reduced to lessons, like the point of suffering is to generate content with a takeaway, so I won't call it a lesson. I'll just say this: the feeling was real. It was always real. And the only reason I know that now, instead of wondering about it for the next 40 years, is that one Thursday morning in November, some part of me decided, before I had time to think about it, before I could talk myself out of it, that the feeling was worth more than the peace. It was. It always was. I've been sitting with this story for a long time before deciding to tell it out loud. And even now, I'm not sure I have the right words. Not the kind that wrap things up cleanly, anyway. What happened in that hallway on Thanksgiving morning didn't come with resolution already attached. It came with a door, a sound, and a decision I had about 3 seconds to make. What I keep thinking about is cause and effect, not in a mystical way, not in the way people sometimes mean when they say, "What goes around comes around," and expect you to find that comforting. I mean it in the plainest, most human sense. Every choice has a consequence that runs forward in time, and every silence has one too. Stellan's choices had consequences. Drusilla's silence had consequences. And my choice, that Thursday morning, had consequences. For Waverly, for my family, for me. None of those consequences were clean. That's the part I want to be honest about, because I think we tell these stories sometimes like the brave choice is also the easy choice, like hitting record and calling 911 opened a door to something simple. It didn't. It opened a door to 8 months of legal proceedings, 4 months of silence from my mother, a cousin who had to testify in a courthouse at 15, and a version of Thanksgiving that my family will never fully recover from. And I would do it again, without hesitation. That's what I mean when I talk about moral clarity. It's not that it feels good, it's that it's right, even when right is the hardest direction to walk in. I think about who I was at 13, feeling something I couldn't name and having nowhere to put it. That girl, the one who noticed things and then talked herself out of her own noticing, she didn't lack courage exactly. She lacked the conviction that her perception was worth trusting. That's what I want to say to anyone who's sitting with a feeling they keep trying to logic away. The feeling is data. It is telling you something real. The question is whether you trust yourself enough to act on it before the cost of not acting becomes someone else's. Waverly is 17 now. She's living somewhere quiet, somewhere with books, somewhere away from the house where she spent years saying nothing because she believed, the way children are taught to believe, that silence was the safest option. It wasn't. Silence protected the wrong person every single time. There's a kind of strength that doesn't look like strength from the outside. It's not loud. It's not confident. It's just a thumb-pressing record before the brain catches up. A voice saying, "Get out of this room," even while the hands are shaking. A decision made in the gap between knowing and acting. That gap is where character lives, I think. Not in the moments when it's easy to do the right thing, but in the 3 seconds when it isn't. I pressed record. I made the call. I sat in a courthouse hallway for 1 hour and 47 minutes and watched the clock. And when Waverly walked out of those doors, she walked toward me. That's the only ending I needed.